Hello and welcome to another video here at the End to End Hockey channel. Today we've got a few signings to go over in Calgary and Edmonton, a few injury reports to update, plus we have a couple of defenseman rumors, including the last two RFA defensemen that are left unsigned right now, a little bit of a crowded defense in Pittsburgh, plus a defenseman in Jersey, Minnesota, who could be entering the final year with their teams. We'll get to all of that coming up right now. Hello and welcome to another video here. I'd like to get started today with a few signings. Just a couple today. The Edmonton Oilers have been able to re-sign RFA forward Ryan McLeod to a 1-year, one-way deal that has a cap hit of $798,000. So it's a pretty good deal for both sides. McLeod has started to prove himself to be a regular bottom six forward for the Edmonton Oilers. He's been utilized over the past year, which was his first full season, as a third line center. He's done pretty well too, putting up 9 goals and 21 points in 71 games last year, and he did a really good job centering that third line. I did think he would have gone at least a little bit more, but with the small sample size, you could probably see why Edmonton signed him to a short-term cheap money deal. They also don't have a lot of cap space right now, so McLeod's probably banking on himself right now to reproduce or get a little bit more production than what he did last year and raise his stock a little bit so he can get a better deal next year. He will be once again RFA, but definitely a good deal for both sides. For Edmonton, this is going to help them keep their cap down for at least this year, able to sign McLeod to close to league minimum deal and give them another forward for this year. As for McLeod, he should get another chance to prove himself as a good third-line center, and I think that with this team shaped up the way it is right now, he should be a third-line center this year for the Oilers and continue to improve his game. And over in the rivals with the Calgary Flames, they signed their last RFA for this year in Adam Ruzicka, as he gets a 2-year, two-way deal at an AAV of $763,000. Now, Ruzicka has been a really good AHL forward. He finally got a little bit of time in the NHL last year. He put up 5 goals and 10 points in 28 games. He seems like he can be a decent bottom 6 forward in the near future for the Calgary Flames. I know they don't have a lot of depth forwards right now, so I do think he could be a bottom 6 option this year for him. It's not too much of a big money deal, and he will probably play fourth line minutes this year, but I think in time he could be a good third liner and produce probably 25 to 40 points in a season, maybe, if he reaches his potential. But good deal for both sides. For the Flames, this was their last signing, so maybe look for them to add maybe one more top 9 winger, whether that's on a PTO where they have like a Sonny Milano, or if they do try and get a trade, or maybe they go and try and sign a different free agent. But I do still think they do need another winger to complete the roster. As for Ruzicka, he should get an opportunity, if the Flames don't really do much anymore, to play maybe even on the third line. And I think he will have a chance to prove himself. I mean, 10 points in 28 games is not really too bad. So I think if he can show the Flames that he can replicate that sort of production over an 82-game season, I think he should be paid accordingly in a couple years. He'll be an RFA at the end of the deal. So pretty good deal for both sides, and I like this signing for the Flames. Now we have a couple of injury updates. As we get through training camp, we start the preseason, there will start to become more and more injuries, and some teams could have huge impacts because of it. We'll start in Philadelphia, where it does not seem good for their team, riddled with injuries. We know that Bobby Brink, who's a young rookie, and Joel Farabee, who's a good young player, probably won't start the season due to injuries. Farabee will probably miss the first couple weeks, maybe a month. Brink will probably miss the first month and a half due to injuries. But we now know that for sure that Ryan Ellis is not going to start the year with the Philadelphia Flyers due to injuries. The injury kept him out of basically all of last year. He only played 4 games with the Flyers after being acquired last offseason. And given he was acquired to be a top 4 right shot defenseman, it just it's really, really bad news for the Flyers, who really need to try and turn things around this year and try and compete for playoffs, which I think they have a really hard time doing with all of these injuries piling up right now. It is possible we could see Ellis maybe closer to the end of the season, February, March next year, but at this point, he'll probably miss at least the first 2, 3, 4 months due to injuries. And now we have news that Sean Couturier is going to be out for at least a little while due to injuries that kept him out for the latter part of last season. So it's only week to week right now, and he doesn't need surgery, so that's good news for Couturier and the Flyers. But Couturier is a huge part of their top six. And with the way their top six is really set up, they don't really have a lot of offense. So if Couturier misses significant time, it is a huge blow to this Flyers team. I mean, there have been some that say it could be season-ending. I'm not sure if we're going to see it be season-ending right now, especially with no surgery. But I do think he could miss at least the first month or two due to injuries. And if the Flyers have Farabee, Couturier, Brink, and Ellis all out for the start of the season, and maybe even get more injured, this team is going to look disastrous to start the year. And I think that if they don't have any of those players for the first 10 to 15 games, this team could find wins hard to come by this team. And I think that as much as the Flyers have tried to do an aggressive retool this year, it doesn't look like they're going to be much improved, if anything worse than what they did last year. So definitely keep an eye on the Flyers to see how these injuries progress, and definitely keep an eye on the Flyers because if they start out really, really sore, then I definitely think we could see moves. Bad news for the Vancouver Canucks. During preseason games, there were a couple of injuries. Now, Brock Besser is going to be out 3 to 4 weeks due to a hand injury, so he's going to miss the first week or two of the regular season. Not too long of an injury, but Besser is a huge part of their top six right now. And given it was a hand injury, I'm wondering how well he'll play when he gets back, because he is a good sniper for the Vancouver Canucks. But it's only 1 to 2 weeks he'll miss, so it's not too bad. But I do think that this will allow some of the other guys on their team to compete for a roster spot. And then on top of that, you have Ilya Mikheyev, the new offseason acquisition by the Vancouver Canucks, also sustaining an injury and being out week to week due to it. So there's no real timetable for Mikheyev, just week to week right now. But if he is injured to start the year, that's going to be another huge blow to the Canucks. I mean, they have a lot of top 9 forwards, some of them who would play in the fourth line if they had a fully healthy roster. So if Mikheyev and Besser miss the start of the year due to injuries, it is quite possible to see guys like Höglander, Podkolzin, and Pearson in the top 9, which I don't think is quite bad. I think this is why the Canucks had so many forwards on their roster to be prepared in case something like this happened. But it is really bad to hear that some of the Canucks are just starting to get injured before the season even starts. Another one is John Tavares, who will also miss 3 to 4 weeks due to injury. So he will miss the first 1 to 2 weeks of the season, maybe 3 due to injury. Tavares is a good second-line center for the Leafs and their captain. So I do think his absence will hurt the Leafs, but it's only a short-term absence. So I think that a young player or something, maybe an Alex Kerfoot, could come in while Tavares is injured and help the Leafs be still a competitive team and goal-scoring team. I don't think the Tavares injury will hurt this team too much, but definitely something to look out on to see how the injury progresses and see if he can be back in the first week or two. And then over in Carolina, Jake Gardiner, who surprisingly got medical clearance after this year, after he missed the entirety of last year due to injury, did seem like he was trending toward a return to game action, but instead he suffered a setback, and it seems like he'll be going back on LTIR. Now, Gardiner was making the Hurricanes' cap really, really difficult to work under, but with Gardiner going back on LTIR, it will make them easier to navigate under the cap. But then again, he was probably going to be a good, important veteran third-pair player for the Hurricanes, so losing a guy like him does have its downside, but he also hadn't played in over a year, so how well would he have played when he came back? It's debatable, but I definitely think that the Gardner injury will help and hurt the Hurricanes. And then Jake McCabe, who had off-season surgery, will probably miss the first month of the season due to it, and this will be a pretty big blow for the Blackhawks. McCabe is a good top four defenseman. I do think the Blackhawks have a lot of young players who could come into the roster in McCabe's absence and play quite well. So I'm not sure if this really hurts or helps the Blackhawks. They'll be able to view a couple of their young defensemen, see how they fit in their lineup. And besides, they're not really looking to win this year. It seems like it's the start of the rebuild. They're probably going for the Connor Bedard sweepstakes. So it's really debatable if this is a really big blow to the Blackhawks. He should be back within the first months of the season, but definitely a big blow for McCabe, and I think that one of the young players on the Blackhawks blue line will benefit from it. And now with that done, we go over to some trade rumors, where we have a few things I want to discuss. So to start with, the Pittsburgh Penguins seem to still be intent to move a defenseman. They have done some phenomenal work, I would say, this offseason by reshaping their blue line. They moved Mike Matheson to Montreal, and they moved John Marino to New Jersey. But they were able to bring back young defenseman Ty Smith in the Marino deal, and good veteran defenseman Jeff Petrie in the Matheson deal. And they were also able to sign Jan Rutta to a 3-year contract in free agency. So they have done an amazing job to reshape this blue line. Petrie will probably be a second-line right-shot defenseman right behind Crystal Tang on the first pair, whereas Ty Smith will probably play either third or second pair minutes. But both these guys are really good. Petrie, we already know, can score really, really well, is a very good point-producing defenseman. Ty Smith should become that eventually. He hasn't really had the best of opportunities in Jersey, but I do think he could be a good third pair defenseman in Pittsburgh. But they still have a crowded blue line. They currently have 8 defensemen who could probably make the NHL, and that's not including Pierre-Olivier Joseph, who they probably want to get in some game time this year. Joseph looks like he's NHL ready and could probably play second or third line minutes. So moving at one more defenseman would probably be smart for the Pittsburgh Penguins, and it seems like it'll be probably one of Brian Dumoulin or Marcus Pettersson. Now, Dumoulin has 1 year left at $4.1 million, so it's not too much money for too long of a term. Dumoulin has proven over his career that he's not too much of a point producer. He had 18 points in 76 games last year, so he's not too much of a point-producing defenseman, but he has played really well with Letang, and it showed that he can be a top 4 defensive defenseman and be called upon in tough situations. So I think that if there were a few teams who could use a veteran top 4 defenseman like Dumoulin, they should definitely see if Pittsburgh and them can make a deal. On the other side, you have Marcus Pettersson, who is definitely younger than Dumoulin. He also has a little bit of a longer contract at 3 years at $4.03 million. So the cap hit's not too much, but he does have 2 more years under contract right now. I do think that they're both defensive defensemen. Pettersson only had 16 points in 72 games last year, so both put up pretty similar point totals and have pretty similar cap hits. So really the only thing is that Dumoulin's entering the final year of his deal and is established top 4 defenseman, whereas Marcus Pettersson has 3 years left, and while he is younger and has more potential, he probably would be a second or third pair defenseman in the NHL right now. But I do think that Pittsburgh will end up finding a taker for at least one of these defensemen, whether it be Dumoulin or Pettersson, and that we should see a Pittsburgh Penguins defenseman trade before the season starts, so the Pittsburgh Penguins can get Pierre-Olivier Joseph into some games for this year. Now, there are 2 remaining RFA defensemen that have not signed contracts yet, and that is Rasmus Sandin with the Toronto Maple Leafs and Nicholas Hague with the Vegas Golden Knights. Now, with Sandin, the Toronto Maple Leafs would like to get a contract done. They think that he is a big piece of their future, and that signing a good young defenseman like him would be good. Now, he's probably looking for somewhere between 2 and 2.5 mil, and I think the Maple Leafs would be willing to pay for that. But on top of that, Sandin doesn't really see a fit for him in that roster right now. The Maple Leafs have Muzzin and Riley and Giordano ahead of him on the depth chart, so the Maple Leafs would probably want him to play on his offside on the right side, but Sandin probably doesn't really want that, so Sandin might try and force his way out of Toronto if he doesn't see a fit long term with the Maple Leafs. I mean, Giordano has 2 years left, and I think Muzzin has 3, and Riley just signed a long-term extension, so it's really hard for him to play the side he's comfortable on the left side. So I do think we could end up seeing Sandin moved. If he was moved, it'd have to be for a young right-shot defenseman who they could play on the right side, who would be more comfortable playing on that side. I think that would have to be something, a young defenseman who could play on the right side as early as this year. But I also wouldn't rule out the possibility that Sandin does accept the fact that he could eventually get a spot on the left side and does end up coming to terms on a deal. But definitely, I think it's either a good signing for the Leafs if they are able to get defenseman Sandin under contract, or they end up moving him for a right-shot defenseman. As for the Golden Knights, it seems like contract talks have gone nowhere between them and Hague, and it seems that they're very far apart on an extension. Hague has been not very productive. He only got into 52 games last year and put up 14 points. I think his ceiling is way more than 14 points. I think in an 82-game season, he could put up 35 points in a season. But he's probably looking for something around the same as Sandin. Sandin and him actually had pretty similar numbers in games played. He's probably looking for $2.5 million at a maybe 2 to 3 year term. But with Vegas' decor, they probably view him as a third pair defenseman and want to sign him to like $1.5 million. Probably somewhere closer to what Timothy Liljegren signed for with the Maple Leafs earlier this offseason. So I do think that if the Golden Knights and Hague can't bridge the gap, they may explore a trade. I know that there were a couple teams interested in Hague in the offseason that were inquiring. But once again, I think if Hague was to be moved, there would have to be a young defenseman coming back who could play this year, because I think that the Golden Knights, they don't really have a weak blue line, but without Hague, they would have a depleted blue line a bit. So I do think that if there was a Hague deal, a defenseman would have to come back who would probably be a little bit more in their cap range of about maybe 1 and 2 million instead of 2 and 2.5. But I do think that they could still bridge the gap and Hague could still be signed by the Vegas Golden Knights. And lastly here, there are 2 players entering the final year of their contract who could be entering the final year of their current teams. So, in Jersey, it seems like Damian Severson and New Jersey do want to probably try and work out an extension. It does seem like the Devils want Severson to be kept around. Severson is entering the final year of his contract. He carries a cap hit of $4.16 million this year, and he has been a pretty good offensive defenseman. He's put up well over 20 to 30 points consistently, but last year, putting up 11 goals and 46 points, which is his career high, really probably shot his stock up and will probably be looking for a reasonable size raise for next year. I could see him get $6 to $7 million on the open market next year. I mean, right shot defensemen aren't really easy to come by, so offensive right shot defenseman like Severson is really good. So I definitely think someone out there would pay him. But with the right side of their defense, I don't think his future would probably be with New Jersey. If you look at the defense right now, they have offensive powerhouse Dougie Hamilton on the top pair. They just acquired John Marino from Pittsburgh, who could easily fill a top 4 role. And then you have young prospects like Shakir Mukhamaduddin and Simon Nemec, who could both probably play on that third pair and in time be a top 4 defenseman. So I don't really see a fit for Severson long term with this Devils team, and I think that he could be in trade rumors later on this season, closer to the deadline, because I don't think that the Devils are quite ready to be a playoff team yet, and I think that them moving Severson at the deadline to get a young guy like Nemec or McLeod into game action would be good. I wouldn't even rule out a trade earlier in the season, maybe even before training camp. But I do think that Severson's time in Jersey is numbered, and even if he finishes out the season with Jersey and they go into some surprising run and they want to keep him as their own rental, I don't see him making it past free agency still with the Devils. I think he'll find another opportunity elsewhere. As for Dumba, I think him and the Wild have a really good relationship and really do want to keep him. And I think Dumba really does want to stay in Minnesota, but looking from the Wild's cap problems, they still have a huge cap penalty from last year's buyouts of Parise and Suter. But given that Dumba is making $6 million right now, he hasn't had the best offensive season since he had 50 points a few years ago. He hasn't really been that much of an offensive producer. 50 points was his career high, but he hasn't broken 30 points since. He had 27 points last year, which was a pretty good total for him. But I still think a team could give him $7 to $8 million on the open market. I think that given the fact that Dumba is an offensive powerhouse that's played consistent top 4 minutes over the past few years, he would be highly sought after in the offseason. So the type of discount he would have to take to remain in Minnesota would be pretty big, and I don't see him taking that big of a discount to remain with the Wild. So I think that the Wild could be moving forward without Dumba after this year. Now, I do see them being more of a playoff team, so I'm not sure if they would trade him at the deadline, but even if they don't trade him at the deadline, it's either they trade him close or around the deadline, or they lose him for nothing via free agency, because I do think that there will be some teams looking for a right shot defenseman like Dumba, and I think that he could get a lot more money elsewhere than he could in Minnesota. So definitely keep an eye out on Dumba and Severson. Possible trade targets for around the trade deadline, but if the line goes by and they are still a member of their current clubs, then look for them to sign free agent deals elsewhere once free agency hits next year. So this is all I'll be talking about today. Remember to like this video and subscribe. Remember, I do a blog, so I'll link that in the description below. And I can't wait to see you guys for next week's video. See you guys soon.